Did you ever wonder about those clever cooking tricks only Grandma knew and we forgot? Back then, these simple kitchen secrets made daily meals easier and filled homes with warmth and care. What else did we lose when those tricks faded from memory? Grandma's kitchen was a treasure trove of simple yet clever tricks, and using potato water to thicken soups was one of her favorites. Instead of reaching for flour or cream, she would save the water left over from boiling potatoes, which contained natural starches that added a smooth texture and subtle richness to her broths. This method was especially useful during times when ingredients were scarce or rationed, allowing her to stretch soups further without sacrificing flavor or consistency. The potato water also had a mild taste that did not overpower the dish, making it an ideal thickener for both vegetable and meat soups. This resourceful approach not only kept meals hearty, but also showcased her ability to use every bit of the ingredients at hand. It was a simple reminder that great cooking did not always require fancy additions, just a little knowledge passed down through generations. Modern cooks often overlook this practical tip, but revisiting it can bring a nostalgic touch and a boost of homey comfort to any soup. It is one of those forgotten secrets that can elevate everyday meals without extra cost or fuss. Before cling film and plastic containers became common, Grandma had a clever way to keep leftover meat fresh and tasty by wrapping it carefully in wax paper. This old-fashioned technique helped preserve moisture while allowing the meat to breathe just enough to prevent it from becoming soggy or spoiled quickly. Wax paper was widely available and easy to use, making it the perfect solution for storing cold cuts, roasted pieces, or cooked meats. By wrapping leftovers this way, she extended their shelf life in the fridge, reducing waste and ensuring that every bit could be enjoyed again. The gentle barrier protected food from drying out while preventing odors from mixing with other items. This simple yet effective preservation trick was especially important in days when refrigeration was less advanced or less common. Today, it is easy to forget how much thought went into keeping food fresh without modern conveniences. Revisiting this method reminds us of a time when resourcefulness was key in the kitchen and every meal counted. It is a timeless technique worth rediscovering for those who appreciate both tradition and practicality. Grandma's baking always had a special touch, and one secret she swore by was adding a pinch of salt to sweet-baked goods. This tiny addition worked wonders by balancing the sweetness and enhancing the overall flavor profile of cakes, cookies, and pies. Salt brings out the natural taste of other ingredients, preventing desserts from becoming flat or overly sugary. This subtle technique helped her recipes stand out, making each bite more complex and satisfying. The pinch of salt also softened harsh edges in overly sweet recipes, creating a more rounded flavor. It was an easy step, but one that made a noticeable difference, especially when working with simple ingredients. Passed down through generations, this baking hack remains a classic for anyone looking to elevate their homemade treats. Modern cooks might skip it, but incorporating this forgotten trick can bring a nostalgic depth and warmth to sweets. It is a small detail that transforms ordinary recipes into memorable comfort foods. Remembering this tip is a way to honor Grandma's careful approach to flavor and her love for baking. Long before fancy seasoning blends and flavor enhancers, Grandma had a clever secret for adding richness to stews: used coffee grounds. This technique might sound unusual today, but coffee's natural bitterness and earthiness helped deepen the flavor profile of meat and vegetable stews without overpowering them. She would add just a small amount during cooking, allowing the grounds to infuse their subtle complexity and give the stew a smoky, robust undertone. This was especially useful when meat was limited or less flavorful, as coffee helped mask any toughness or blandness. It was a creative way to make the most out of available pantry items and add layers of taste with nothing wasted. Using coffee grounds in cooking is a forgotten trick that speaks to a time when nothing was discarded lightly. It shows Grandma's resourcefulness and her talent for transforming humble ingredients into satisfying meals. Today's cooks could try this tip to surprise their palate and connect with a culinary past full of ingenuity. When vegetables started to look limp or tired, Grandma had a quick fix that saved many a side dish: steaming them under a wet paper towel. Instead of throwing away slightly wilted greens or carrots, She would place them in a covered dish, cover with a damp paper towel, and steam them gently until they regained their fresh crispness. This simple trick revived the texture and color of vegetables, making them more appealing and enjoyable at mealtime. It was a clever way to reduce waste and stretch grocery purchases further. The moist heat restored moisture without overcooking, preserving nutrients and flavor better than reheating in a pan or microwave alone. This method also required minimal effort and equipment, which was ideal for busy kitchens or those with limited resources. Though often forgotten today, this steaming trick is a useful reminder of Grandma's care and practicality. It teaches modern cooks that with a little attention, even less than perfect produce can become delicious again, reflecting an era when nothing edible was wasted. One of Grandma's best-kept secrets for tender cornbread was soaking the cornmeal before baking. Instead of mixing dry cornmeal directly with wet ingredients, she would let it soak for at least 30 minutes or sometimes longer, allowing the grains to soften and hydrate fully. This step created a moist, crumbly texture that was far superior to the dense or gritty cornbread many are used to today. The soaking time helped the cornmeal absorb flavors and produce a golden, tender crumb that melted in the mouth. This trick was especially important when working with coarser or less processed cornmeal, common in earlier decades. It was a simple yet transformative technique that elevated a humble staple into something special. Many modern recipes skip this step for convenience, but Grandma's method is a reminder that patience and small adjustments can make a big difference. It reflects the careful attention to detail and pride in baking passed down through families. Revisiting this trick connects us to a time when cooking was slow, thoughtful, and rewarding. Grandma had a knack for turning leftovers into new meals, and one clever way she did this was by using thin pancakes as wraps. Instead of serving plain pancakes only for breakfast, she would spread leftovers like savory meats, vegetables, or spreads inside, rolling them up to create easy-to-eat snacks or light lunches. This was a practical way to avoid waste and provide variety in the weekly menu, especially when fresh ingredients were limited. The soft pancake held fillings well, making each bite portable and flavorful. This trick also allowed for endless creativity depending on what was on hand, from leftover stews to chopped cold cuts. Using pancakes as wraps was a fun and resourceful idea that brought excitement to routine meals. It showed how Grandma turned simple ingredients into versatile dishes without needing fancy gadgets or expensive products. This forgotten technique inspires modern cooks to rethink leftovers and add a nostalgic twist to everyday cooking. It is a reminder that with a little imagination, meals can be reinvented to feel fresh and satisfying all over again. The secret to Grandma's perfect pie crust was in the way she folded cold butter into the flour by hand, creating flaky layers that melted in your mouth. This technique involved carefully cutting butter into small pieces and gently folding it through the flour mixture without overworking the dough, preserving pockets of fat that puffed up during baking. The result was a light, tender crust that was both crisp and soft, unlike the dense or tough pastries common in less careful baking. This hands-on method required patience and a gentle touch, skills Grandma honed over years of making pies and tarts from scratch. It reflected a time when processed shortcuts were less available and every step counted. Modern bakers often rely on food processors or pre-made crusts, but this traditional technique remains the gold standard for flaky pastry. It captures the spirit of Grandma's care and craftsmanship in the kitchen, turning humble ingredients into something extraordinary. Relearning this trick can transform homemade pies and bring a piece of culinary history back to life. Grandma always knew how to keep her kitchen tidy, and one trick she used was placing a peeled onion in the pot to prevent boilovers when cooking pasta or milk. This simple tip worked like a charm by breaking the surface tension of boiling liquids, stopping bubbles from spilling over the sides and making a mess. It was an inexpensive and natural solution that saved time on cleaning and reduced kitchen stress. Onions were readily available and easy to add, making this a practical hack passed down through generations. The onion did not affect the taste of the food, but acted as an invisible helper, quietly doing its job while pots simmered away. This forgotten kitchen tip highlights Grandma's wisdom in managing daily cooking challenges with ease. It reminds modern cooks that sometimes the simplest solutions are the best and encourages a hands-on approach to keeping the kitchen running smoothly. Bringing this old trick back shows appreciation for the small things that made cooking more enjoyable. To keep green beans and other vegetables looking fresh and appetizing, Grandma swore by blanching them quickly in boiling water before shocking them in ice-cold water. This method helped preserve the vibrant color, crisp texture, and nutritional value that can fade during cooking or storage. Blanching was an essential step when preparing vegetables for freezing or for serving in salads and side dishes, especially when presentation mattered during family meals. The quick cooking stopped enzyme activity that causes discoloration and kept the produce looking lively and appealing. This technique also softened the beans just enough without overcooking, maintaining that perfect balance between tender and crisp. It was a simple but effective way to elevate the dining experience using basic kitchen skills. Today, many skip this step for convenience, but rediscovering it can bring a fresh, nostalgic touch to vegetable dishes and remind us of Grandma's thoughtful approach to preparing food. Reheating fried foods in a dry skillet was one of Grandma's clever tricks to keep leftovers tasting fresh and crispy. Unlike microwaving, which often leaves fried items soggy and limp, using a dry skillet allowed the food to regain its original crunch by reheating it evenly over gentle heat. Grandma knew that a quick toss in a hot pan could bring life back to fried chicken, fritters, or potato pancakes without the need for extra oil or complicated methods. This technique not only preserved texture but also improved flavor, avoiding the disappointing rubbery or greasy results common when microwaving. It was a practical hack that saved money and prevented waste by making yesterday's fried foods just as enjoyable as when freshly cooked. In times when every meal mattered, having a reliable way to refresh fried dishes was invaluable. Today, many people overlook this simple approach, but it remains a timeless reminder of Grandma's kitchen wisdom. This trick encourages home cooks to put a little extra care into leftovers and enjoy them without compromise. It is a small step that makes a big difference, reflecting the resourcefulness of kitchens past. Making mock chicken broth with vegetable scraps was a resourceful way Grandma stretched ingredients to create rich homemade stock without wasting anything. Instead of discarding carrot peels, onion ends, celery leaves, and other vegetable remnants, she collected them in a pot to simmer slowly with herbs and spices. The result was a flavorful broth that served as the foundation for countless soups, stews, and sauces. This homemade stock added depth and nourishment to meals without relying on costly or processed bouillon cubes. It was a simple, sustainable practice rooted in thrift and care, ensuring every scrap contributed to the family's nourishment. By making broth this way, Grandma also avoided unnecessary additives or preservatives found in store-bought products, keeping meals wholesome and natural. This technique reflects a time when nothing was thrown away lightly and kitchens were places of creativity and conservation. Today's cooks can rediscover this forgotten trick to reduce food waste and enrich dishes with homemade goodness. It is an easy step that honors the tradition of cooking with respect for ingredients and the earth. Adding breadcrumbs to meatloaf was one of Grandma's subtle tricks for keeping ground meat tender and moist without relying on extra fat or fillers. Instead of using only meat, she would mix in finely crushed breadcrumbs soaked in milk or broth, which absorbed juices and helped hold the loaf together. This simple addition prevented the meatloaf from becoming dry or dense during baking, creating a soft and satisfying texture. It also stretched the meat further, making the meal more economical for families watching their budgets. Breadcrumbs acted as a gentle binder, improving the loaf's structure and making slices less likely to crumble. This technique was especially important when meat quality was variable or limited. Grandma's approach balanced flavor and texture with resourcefulness, turning humble ingredients into a hearty centerpiece. While modern recipes often rely on packaged fillers, this traditional method remains a wholesome way to enhance meatloaf. It reminds home cooks that small adjustments can transform everyday dishes, preserving the comforting quality that makes meatloaf a beloved classic. Embracing this tip is a way to connect with culinary heritage and practical wisdom. Using parchment paper to roll out sticky dough was one of Grandma's neat kitchen hacks to prevent mess and avoid the need for extra flour. When working with soft or wet doughs, she would place the dough between 2 sheets of parchment and gently roll it out, keeping the surface and rolling pin clean and the dough from sticking. This technique preserved the dough's moisture and texture, unlike sprinkling extra flour, which can dry it out or make it tough. The parchment sheets made handling delicate doughs like pie crusts or cookies much easier and less frustrating. This method also sped up prep time and cleanup, a boon in busy kitchens where efficiency mattered. Grandma's practical solution avoided waste and maintained the integrity of her baked goods. Today, many home cooks rely on this forgotten trick to keep doughs smooth and workable without altering recipes. It is a simple step that saves time, reduces mess, and ensures better results, reflecting the thoughtful care that went into traditional baking. Rediscovering this approach helps maintain the balance of texture and ease in the kitchen. Resting pie dough wrapped in a towel was one of Grandma's careful steps to control temperature and moisture, making the dough easier to handle and less prone to tearing. After mixing, she would form the dough into a ball, cover it with a clean kitchen towel, and let it rest for at least 30 minutes before rolling it out. This rest period allowed the gluten to relax and the moisture to distribute evenly, preventing the dough from shrinking during baking. Wrapping it in a towel also protected the dough from drying out, keeping it supple and pliable. This simple practice reduced frustration and improved the final texture of pies and tarts, ensuring a tender, flaky crust. Grandma's method was especially important when working in warm or dry kitchens, where dough could easily become sticky or brittle. Modern bakers sometimes overlook this step, but it remains a key part of traditional pastry making. Taking the time to rest dough shows respect for the process and rewards patience with better results. This forgotten trick is a gentle reminder that good things come to those who wait in the kitchen. Using leftover coffee and chocolate cake batter was one of Grandma's clever ways to deepen flavor with something already in the kitchen. Instead of wasting brewed coffee, she would add it to the cake mix, enhancing the chocolate's richness and adding subtle complexity without overpowering sweetness. The coffee's bitterness balanced the sugar and intensified the cocoa notes, resulting in a moist, flavorful cake that delighted family and guests alike. This tip transformed a simple chocolate cake into something more sophisticated with no extra cost or special ingredients. It was especially useful when baking for large gatherings or special occasions when every bit of flavor counted. Grandma's use of coffee reflected her resourceful mindset and love of layering tastes. Today, bakers often rediscover this trick to elevate desserts naturally. It is a forgotten gem that adds depth and warmth to baked goods while honoring the creative spirit of kitchens past. This simple addition proves how everyday ingredients can bring magic to familiar recipes. Turning day-old bread into croutons was one of Grandma's smart ways to avoid waste and add crunch to salads and soups. Instead of tossing stale bread, she would cut it into small cubes, toss them with oil and seasonings, then bake or pan-fry them until golden and crispy. These homemade croutons provided a flavorful texture contrast that brightened simple dishes without extra expense. This trick extended the life of bread, making sure nothing went unused in the kitchen. It was especially handy when fresh bread was less accessible or expensive. The crispy croutons brought a touch of comfort and elegance to everyday meals, showing how small touches could transform plain food. Grandma's method was straightforward, requiring only a little time and basic ingredients. Today, many people buy pre-made croutons, but making them from leftover bread is a forgotten art worth reviving. This technique encourages sustainability and creativity while honoring culinary traditions. It is an easy way to add homemade flair and minimize waste in any kitchen. Preserving herbs by freezing them in olive oil cubes was one of Grandma's clever methods for keeping fresh flavors year-round. She would chop herbs like parsley, thyme, or rosemary, place them in ice cube trays, and cover them with olive oil before freezing. These herb cubes could be popped directly into soups, stews, or sauces, releasing concentrated flavor without wilting or losing freshness. This technique saved herbs from spoiling quickly and prevented the hassle of drying or wasting excess bunches. It also ensured that the bright, aromatic qualities of fresh herbs were available even in winter months or off-season. Grandma's simple yet effective preservation trick showcased her practical approach to maximizing ingredients. Today, many cooks use this forgotten method to reduce waste and add convenience to meal prep. It is a beautiful blend of tradition and innovation that keeps the spirit of fresh cooking alive. Rediscovering this tip invites us to savor the taste of fresh herbs whenever we want, just like Grandma intended. Cooking pancakes on a cast iron skillet was one of Grandma's trusted techniques to ensure even heat and a perfectly golden crust. She favored cast iron for its ability to retain heat consistently, allowing pancakes to cook through without burning or sticking. This method produced pancakes with a crispy edge and tender center, the kind that made breakfast feel special. The natural seasoning of the skillet added subtle flavor and helped create a non-stick surface without excessive butter or oil. Grandma's choice of cookware reflected her understanding of materials and timing in the kitchen. While modern non-stick pans are convenient, many home cooks still seek the authentic results of cast iron. This traditional technique connects us to a time when cooking was as much about skill as ingredients. Using a cast iron skillet for pancakes is a simple way to honor Grandma's expertise and enjoy breakfast the way it was meant to be. Using a toothpick to test cake doneness was a simple but essential step Grandma never skipped, ensuring cakes were perfectly baked every time. She would insert a clean toothpick into the center of the cake and check if it came out clean or with moist crumbs, a reliable indicator that the cake was cooked through. This quick test prevented overbaking, which could dry out the cake, or underbaking, which left the inside raw or gooey. Grandma's use of this straightforward tool reflected her attention to detail and desire for consistently excellent results. It was a low-tech method that required no special equipment, just patience and observation. Many modern bakers still rely on this timeless tip to avoid guesswork in the oven. This forgotten trick encourages home cooks to trust their senses and simple tools, reminding us that great baking often comes down to small habits. Embracing this method helps preserve the thoughtful care Grandma put into every dessert. Adding a slice of potato to brown sugar was one of Grandma's clever pantry tricks that saved time during baking. Brown sugar hardens when exposed to air, forming clumps difficult to break and measure. To prevent this, Grandma placed a peeled slice of potato in the sugar container. The moisture from the potato kept the sugar soft and easy to scoop, eliminating extra effort or ruining recipes by uneven measurements. This simple trick used natural humidity without changing sugar's flavor. It was especially valuable before plastic wraps and airtight containers were common. This forgotten hack reflected Grandma's practical approach to kitchen challenges. Today, few remember it, but it remains a natural, chemical-free way to keep baking essentials soft. Bringing it back encourages simple solutions from the past and adds nostalgia to baking. It is a gentle reminder that the best ideas come from the simplest places. Using leftover pancakes as a base for savory snacks was one of Grandma's inventive ways to reinvent breakfast leftovers and add variety. Instead of serving pancakes only in the morning, she layered them with savory ingredients like cheese, ham, eggs, or sautéed vegetables. This created quick snacks or light lunches that stretched food further and reduced waste. The soft pancakes worked like bread or tortillas to hold fillings well. This allowed her to adapt meals based on what was available, turning yesterday's breakfast into something new. It was budget-friendly and added flavor without complicated prep. This forgotten use of pancakes highlights Grandma's creativity at making every meal special. Today's cooks can revive this technique with minimal effort, embracing a comforting tradition blending thrift with taste. It is a tasty way to honor heritage and enjoy food in new ways. Cooking bacon in the oven was a hands-off trick Grandma swore by for perfectly crispy strips. Instead of frying and dealing with splatters or uneven cooking, she laid strips on a baking sheet lined with parchment or a rack and baked at moderate heat. This allowed even cooking without constant attention or flipping. The oven's consistent heat produced crispy edges and tender centers, avoiding burnt spots common on stovetops. It freed stovetop space and reduced cleanup since grease was contained. Grandma appreciated this time-saving method, especially for large families. Though modern methods vary, baking remains preferred for consistent results. This trick shows how simple changes improve cooking ease and food quality. rediscovering it offers an effortless way to enjoy America's favorite breakfast staple. Storing apples with potatoes to prevent sprouting was a forgotten fridge hack Grandma used to extend produce life. Apples release ethylene gas that slows potato sprouting, which prevents shoots if kept too long. By placing apples in the same storage as potatoes, she kept potatoes fresh longer and reduced waste. This pairing maintained quality without special refrigeration or chemicals. Grandma's knowledge reflected her understanding of natural food properties and desire to stretch budgets. It was valuable when frequent shopping was difficult or preserving harvests mattered. Though many modern fridges offer humidity controls, this natural method remains effective and eco-friendly. Remembering this tip encourages reducing spoilage through clever storage inspired by tradition. It reminds us that thoughtful food storage is a key part of household management passed down generations. Making buttermilk substitute with vinegar and milk was a clever shortcut Grandma used when fresh buttermilk was unavailable or ingredients low. She added vinegar or lemon juice to milk and let it sit until slightly curdled and thickened. This acidic mix mimicked buttermilk's tang and texture, allowing baking tender cakes, biscuits, and pancakes without special ingredients. It was useful during rationing or in areas where buttermilk was scarce. This preserved recipes that relied on acidity for leavening and flavor balance. Grandma's method showed adaptability and practical ingredient management, ensuring delicious results despite limits. Today, many bakers use this reliable alternative. It is a forgotten kitchen staple highlighting Grandma's resourcefulness and quality cooking with simple solutions. Bringing back this tip saves money and honors traditional baking wisdom. Using broth-soaked bread to thicken gravy was an old trick Grandma used to avoid lumps and add flavor naturally. Instead of mixing flour or cornstarch directly into hot liquids, she soaked stale bread in warm broth until softened, then stirred it into gravy. The bread absorbed liquid and thickened sauce smoothly without clumps. This enhanced gravy's richness and body with mild flavor and texture. It was practical when flour was limited or a natural thickener preferred. Grandma's use of broth-soaked bread showed thrift and subtle flavor appreciation. This forgotten method improved consistency and reduced over-thickening or burning risk. Today, it reminds us of culinary creativity using what was on hand to make comforting meals. Rediscovering it offers an easy, wholesome way to enhance gravies with tradition. Peeling tomatoes by dipping in boiling water was a quick, effective method Grandma used to speed sauce prep and preserve tomato flavor and texture. She scored the skin, plunged tomatoes into boiling water briefly, then cooled in cold water. This loosened skin, making it easy to peel without damaging flesh. It was faster and cleaner than peeling by hand or knife. This maintained tomato integrity, ensuring smooth texture and bright taste in dishes. Grandma's simple method saved time and improved homemade tomato quality. Today, chefs and home cooks still favor blanching for freshness and ease. It is a forgotten step, highlighting care in traditional cooking, balancing efficiency with flavor. Reintroducing it elevates tomato recipes and connects us to past kitchen practices. Using a fork to fluff mashed potatoes was one of Grandma's secrets for keeping them light without overmixing. After mashing, she gently lifted and separated lumps with a fork instead of stirring vigorously. This preserved air pockets and prevented gluey or dense texture, resulting in creamy potatoes easy to serve. It was important when using starchy varieties prone to overworking. Grandma's gentle method reflected respect for ingredients. Many cooks today still use this simple technique for perfect mashed potatoes. It is a forgotten but valuable tip, elevating a beloved comfort food. Remembering it honors Grandma's hands-on cooking and commitment to everyday meal care. Embracing this trick adds old-fashioned care to the dinner table. Resting cooked meat under foil before slicing was a classic serving tip Grandma never skipped to lock in juices and improve tenderness. After removing meat from heat, she tented it loosely with foil and let it rest several minutes. This allowed juices to redistribute, preventing spills when cut and keeping slices moist and flavorful. Resting also softened fibers, making meat easier to chew and more enjoyable. This simple step greatly improved roasts, steaks, and poultry quality. Grandma's habit reflected understanding that patience and timing were as important as seasoning and cooking. Though sometimes overlooked today, resting meat remains vital for chefs and home cooks. This forgotten trick reminds us great meals require stillness and care. Reintroducing it elevates dining and honors passed down wisdom. Using leftover citrus peels to freshen the garbage disposal was a kitchen trick Grandma used to keep smells away naturally. After cooking with lemons, oranges, or limes, she saved peels and tossed them down the disposal, running cold water and disposal to grind them. The peels released fresh oils that neutralized odors and cleaned blades. This was an inexpensive, eco-friendly way to keep kitchens smelling fresh without chemicals. Grandma's practice showed resourceful problem-solving, turning waste into cleaning tools. Though forgotten by many, this natural deodorizing trick remains effective and easy. It reflects a time when homes relied on simple homemade cleaning. Rediscovering this tip helps kitchens stay fresh with little effort. It honors Grandma's practical wisdom and love for a clean home. Sorghum syrup had 3 great uses during the war that the United States had actively participated in. It was something the government could rely on both for the people of America and the country's soldiers. So it became a key player just off of that alone. Secondly, most areas already had a knack for sorghum, and it was the more affordable option for a lot of different regions. This was thanks to most places producing their own sorghum, and that's why the disruption in the global supply chain hadn't really affected sorghum production too badly. That's a factor that lots of people don't talk about enough, but supplies for the entire world had become low everywhere by this point. Sorghum was a great alternative to sugar, molasses, and malts, and it helped to keep some of this in store as well. Sorghum also had a bit of magnesium, but it was a really good source of iron. It was also a wonderful sweetener, and this was actually a part of an overall bigger movement. For the first time in a while, the mainstream masses were delving into the culture that was out there in America. Sorghum syrup was a niche part of American syrups, for example, but in folk traditions, it's always been wildly popular. The war was just the first time the general public explored those traditions. You'll see a lot of main ingredients being replaced with affordable and convenient substitutes here. It was just how you did things back then. People weren't exactly living the picture of fine dining back then. Scalloped potatoes and chopped picnic casseroles were recipes that really stuck true to that entire concept. So scalloped potatoes have been a favorite all over the States, and that only became more true during the war, but what about those casseroles? Well, normally this is just what you would call a leftover casserole. That's literally what it was, since a lot of people just used the recipe as a way to get rid of leftovers, which is also why it didn't see a lot of use back when things were okay. Skip to the 40s though, and you'll see nothing but praise for this dish. The concept here is a dish that's ready to eat right out of the fridge. Stale bread, crackers, canned meats like Spam, bits of sausages, and anything that could count as leftovers worked. Sometimes neither the scalloped potatoes nor the casserole was substantial enough on its own to fill a family. Put 2 and 2 together, and you have the closest thing to a picnic that you could get back then. In the Depression era, parsnips were Depression-era gold. They sweetened hard times with their distinct, not very exciting flavor. Parsnips were unlike finicky crops. They didn't mind poor soil or cold weather. In fact, a frost made them taste better. These pale cousins of the carrot were loved for their versatility and their ability to stick around all winter, making them a must-stock for any frugal household. If you had parsnips in the pantry, you were in for something delicious, or at least filling. Parsnips were boiled, roasted, or mashed, and were a blank canvas for creative cooks. They gave soups and stews a hint of sweetness, and could even be used in place of potatoes as a pinch. In fact, they were so reliable a crop that they often ended up in desserts, contributing their natural sugars to cakes, custards, and puddings. They weren't just tasty. They were nutritious and full of fiber, vitamins, and potassium. Parsnips have been trendy root vegetables for modern foodies, but in the 1930s, they were a staple that kept families from hunger. Cottage cheese being used as a substitute for meat is another factor of cooking that you probably never thought was possible, but is actually well documented. Even the Department of Agriculture agrees that it is a pretty rocking substitute for meat as it contains a lot of protein. And when you need to get your macros in on a budget, you cannot be complaining about the source. Sure, everyone would love to fulfill their battle-action protagonist fantasies of chowing down trays and trays of meat, but we only need so many grams of protein in a day to make a bulk. Dry curd cottage cheese especially contains more protein per pound than beef or lamb, and only chicken and veal beat it at that game. It seems there is a lot of cooking know-how that can be picked up from Americans living in those times. Vienna sausages were thin parboiled sausages traditionally made of pork and beef in a casing of sheep's intestine, then given a low-temperature smoking. These originated in Germany during the First World War and were traditionally made from cured pork. After having been brought to North America by European immigrants, Vienna sausage came to mean only smaller and much shorter smoked and canned wieners, rather than link sausage, beginning about 1903. During the post-war days, it became a famous finger food at parties and family gatherings. From hot dogs to casseroles, Vienna sausages can do it all. Just don't expect a gourmet experience. They're still available today, but they're nowhere as famous as they once were. If you asked me if I think rabbit is a fine dining experience or easily available enough that it would work towards relieving national hunger and food shortages, I'd lean towards the former. But the truth may surprise you. Canned rabbit was actually a massive part of the military ration effort for many countries, and our dear old America wasn't any different. After all, across the globe, one thing was true about rabbits. They were an extremely good source of lean meat, and more importantly, there was also a point to keeping a good amount of rabbits. They reproduced pretty quickly, and what you hear about them is grounded in reality. While that might be a slightly jarring thought to have about your food during the war, thinking like that was necessary. It meant that rabbits were really well suited to the kind of environment the war had created, and canned meats like corned beef and Spam were sometimes made entirely out of the lean meat of the various rabbits you could find on land. Hunting them for sustenance also became a popular thing once again, and a lot of people even began to learn to hunt as a result of wanting to provide for their family by at least being able to take advantage of the local game and wildlife. It was a free and tasty source of nutrition, and that wasn't something people were going to miss out on. Potato cakes were pretty much the go-to option for almost everyone during the war period. You have to keep in mind that the country was still juggling the effects of the Great Depression too. Both of them in tandem really made it hard for people to get much else. As good as potatoes can be, especially when you serve them up in cake form, it can get a little stale. When you eat it as much as they did, it gets pretty hard to be excited for it. One way to really spice them up was to pair your potato cakes with fried onions. Sounds simple, but that's pretty much what sums up wartime cooking. Simple, efficient little tricks that make a world of difference. Potatoes were already a wartime staple. They were the easiest crop to grow around, and both rural farmers and government bigwigs took notice of that. This was a simple and amazing way to get some easy comfort and keep bellies full. Also, another thing that made these really easy was how much people traded potatoes and onions. It was really common to barter with vegetables. That meant that the recipe got around. It was in community cookbooks too, so there was no shortage of positive PR for it. I guess you could say it's pretty deserved, wouldn't you say? Mock cuisine in general really saw its heyday during the harsh times of rationing, especially with all the things that were famously eaten before times got so bad, like brain. People wanted more of their favorites, even if they had to compromise in some way. And things like mock brains would become really popular as a result. Known for being quite heavy on the seasoning and being laced with fat, they incorporated basic spices like hickory smoke, paprika, and garlic. People would typically have it with a tomato sauce if they could spare the ingredients, and it definitely scratched that itch that lots of US meat lovers were having around the nation. I never knew fat could be the unsung hero of the Great Depression. Sweet, the solid white fat from the loins or kidneys of sheep and cows, was much more than a pantry staple. It was a survival tool. Sweat was once prized for its versatility, being used in cooking, baking, and even non-food uses such as making candles and soap. When resources were scarce and people had to make the most of every morsel, it was the original all-in-one solution. Suet was a game changer in the kitchen. It gave the dishes of meat pies, puddings, and dumplings richness, which helped to make them hearty enough to stretch a meal for an entire family. During the colder months, when energy reserves were important, its high-calorie content made it essential. Suet wasn't just for savory dishes either, with recipes like suet pudding turning this otherwise savory staple into a sweet one. In addition to its utility, suet was available. It was often considered a byproduct by butchers and sold cheaply, so even the most cash-strapped families could afford it. It was also easy to render and store and kept for months when properly handled. Suet has pretty much disappeared from modern kitchens, but it occasionally makes an appearance in traditional recipes. It was more than just fat to those who lived through the Great Depression. It was a lifeline in lard's clothing. Meatloaf. Who doesn't love this classic comfort food? But what happens when you get a sweet craving and add a little twist to it? Well, you get meatloaf with brown sugar glaze. Meatloaf is a traditional German, Scandinavian, and Belgian dish, and it is a cousin to the meatball in Dutch cuisine. But a brown sugar glaze? That's where things got exciting. This dish was a culinary experiment of the Wei days, and it's safe to say it was a huge success. Every continent came up with their own variations of this dinner, and it became a centerpiece at every dinner table. It was basically combining ground meat, breadcrumbs, and spices, topped with a caramelized brown sugar and ketchup glaze. What could go wrong with that? Meatloaf is still a staple for most people around the world, but you don't really see it get paired with a brown sugar glaze anymore. It was just a post-war craving, I guess. So, one of the most commonly used substitutes for sugar in the war period was easily barley malt syrup. Do you enjoy baking things? Maybe you like whipping up the odd batch of bread and cookies together, or maybe you like some other stuff people do with sugar. Candies, syrups, and lots of sweet treats wouldn't be the same without all their sweeteners. We wouldn't even have good old root beer without it. Barley malt syrup helped people in the making of all of this, including bootleg alcohol that they would make using moonshine in the comfort of their own homes. While of course its usage after the war was nothing to write home about, during the war it spread like absolute wildfire. This was also because barley malt syrup was one of the best preservatives around. It was used to make jams and other kinds of fruit preserves. The idea was to get as much as you could of what would last for as long as possible, so in that regard I get it. It was popular domestically in homes, and it gave industrial food producers a chance at a low-cost sweetener too, so really, nobody really hated this. Beef barley soup is but a humble dish that comes right from tales of peasant wives making hearty breakfasts for their families. Sorry for sounding like a Lord of the Rings extra for a second. Really though, beef barley soup is as vintage as a recipe can get. Barley itself is one of the most ancient grains we have, not just in the States, but all across the world. Again, the idea of pairing it with beef is something we took from our European buddies that immigrated to Uncle Sam's greener pastures. When they weren't looking so green, and trust me, the 1930s and 40s were a long time, it was in everyone's mutual interest to play it smart. By that I mean there was a lot of inspiration to take from all the different communities around in the States. What is America if not a melting pot of different cultures? Beef barley soup used a lot less meat than the recipe typically calls for, but the substitute of roasted vegetables really brought it all together in a wonderful way. It was now not just a peasant dish for field workers, but something everyone had daily, because it was the best they could get. Shortages were extremely common right up to before Pearl Harbor, and especially after it. This is what led to things like Woolton pie dominating the mainstream, even though the dish would probably not see the light of day in normal circumstances. It is just that things like pies, loaves, pizzas, etc. had all become unattainable desires that were out of the public's grasp, more or less. Something had to be done, though, because not only did people need to be fed, they needed to be reminded of why eating good food is one of life's best joys. A hot, nice meal can do so much for a person's soul in times of conflict and uncertainty. And Woolton pies, despite being made entirely out of vegetables, not only gave your body the health boost it needed, but they felt comforting to share with your family. When the Great Depression hit, sorghum syrup ruled the roost as the king of sweeteners. Honey maple syrup be damned. This thick, golden brown liquid was made by boiling down the juice of sorghum cane, and it was a lifeline for families trying to sweeten their lives without breaking the bank. It was affordable and versatile enough to earn a permanent place in Depression-era pantries. Sorghum syrup was not just a sweetener. It was a source of vital nutrients such as iron, calcium, and magnesium. It wasn't just tasty, it was functional, in an era when balanced meals were often a luxury. Sorghum on a biscuit, cornbread, or oatmeal could make a meager breakfast something special. It even made its way into sauces, marinades, baked goods, and even into ice cream. Sorghum syrup production was a community affair. During harvest time, people gathered in entire neighborhoods to crush sorghum stalks and boil the juice into syrup. It was labor-intensive, but it was also social, and it forged bonds even in the darkest of times. Back then, it wasn't about foodie trends, but today, sorghum syrup is experiencing a small renaissance in the culinary world. It was about survival, resourcefulness, and getting as much goodness as we could out of the land. Sorghum syrup wasn't just a treat for Depression-era families. It was a symbol of sweetness that endured in hard times. Hogshead cheese is one of the more bizarre meals on the list. Okay, before you jump to any conclusions judging from the name, this meaty meal doesn't contain any cheese or any dairy products at all. This unique delicacy originated somewhere in ancient Germany and instantly made its way to other parts of Europe. So, if not cheese, what was it actually made of? It was basically flesh from the head of a pig, typically set in aspic and usually eaten cold, at room temperature, or in a sandwich. This dish was popular in the post-war era as it made use of every part of the animal, reflecting a time when nothing went to waste. Many recipes use a bit of lemon juice to add a bit more flavor to the jelly. It has disappeared from our dinner tables and menus, and I don't think this one calls for a comeback. During the Second World War, a lot of basic rationing food was cooked up by the government thanks to that intervention and those relief efforts that I'm talking about. One of those was vegetable bouillon cubes, and they started to become extremely common ingredients. In the United States, food shortages during wartime were such weekly occurrences that people had pretty much accepted them as a fact of everyday life. Not that getting used to it mattered much, since hunger was still bad enough of a problem for people to get out into the streets and make as much noise as they could. Bouillon cubes were convenient and efficient and were pretty much in the same vein of food as ration chocolate was. All stuff like this actually went through the Office of Price Administration, and one of the most popular items they ever gave out was these cubes. They helped make broths and added loads of flavor to soup, and the government was, of course, quick to notice the fact that people had taken to mostly soups as far as everyday meals went. They were cheap, saved lots of space, were easy to carry around and even easier to cook, and the best part was they applied to every household. It wasn't like if you didn't have an oven, you couldn't use cubes. Fish soufflé and baked potatoes were a wonderful combination, the kind of thing that just bounces off of the beach of its different parts and sides. The fish soufflé, along with a generous serving of baked potato, wasn't just delicious, it was also extremely nutritious. This was probably one of the recipes that kept up health the most throughout the whole ordeal. You might be wondering how fish was common enough for the recipe to have this kind of weight behind it. It just so happens that if you lived near a coastal city back then, you were definitely in luck, at least compared to the rest of the population. Fishing skyrocketed, not as a hobby this time, but as a necessary skill. Fish were plentiful, and most of all, they were free. They were the main source of nutrition for a lot of places. When people had no use for fish as food, they'd sell it to make some quick money and get whatever necessities they needed. Besides, it was common enough to get things like crab in the waters back then too. Bubble and squeak was something that completely fit the situations most people would find themselves in during the war, because this dish is all about the leftovers. Usually, Sunday dinner's leftovers would be used in a bubble and squeak to make sure nothing went to waste. Plus, people would definitely take that sentiment to heart when it came to holiday dinners where there were enough things left to constitute at least 2 or 3 meals the next day. Usually, this dish is made with potatoes and cabbage and is fried, so it goes properly and amazingly with some potato flotties or other items on the list. Maybe you can take a note from people's books the next time you think you have nothing to eat, but plenty of things still left. It's hard to imagine something as simple as eggs without a chicken coop, but during the Great Depression, powdered eggs were a reality. These dehydrated wonders became a staple in American homes, providing a protein-rich solution that didn't spoil and didn't require refrigeration. Powdered eggs could sit on a pantry shelf for months, unlike fresh eggs, and that was a godsend for families facing uncertainty. When you mixed powdered eggs with water, you got something that was like scrambled eggs, kind of. Powdered eggs were bland and grainy, but when there were no other options, powdered eggs did the trick. They weren't just for breakfast. Home cooks used them in baked goods, soups, casseroles, and even puddings. Powdered eggs were versatile enough that even the least equipped kitchen could create quite a number of dishes without a single cluck in sight. Cheap powdered eggs were available, and they were a favorite item for government relief programs, which made them available to struggling families. Their utility extended beyond homes. Powdered eggs were shipped overseas to soldiers during World War II to make sure troops were nourished even in the most remote locations. Powdered eggs are now a must in emergency kits and camping supplies, but during the Great Depression, they were a sign of resilience. If you're a fan of pineapple on pizza, you would have loved this next one. Pineapple and cheese salad was a unique delight back in the day. This dish came into existence when someone decided to mix pineapple and cheese together in times of misery. Imagine cubes of pineapple in a creamy cheese mixture. Terrifying or finger-licking delicious? There's no in-between. This was a variation of the infamous candle salad, which was a vintage fruit salad popular in America in the 1920s and was typically composed of lettuce, pineapple, banana, cherry, and either mayonnaise or cottage cheese. This was considered a luxurious delicacy during the tough times of the war, but just fails to meet the standards now. It's still a great way to use up leftover pineapple from your holiday punch if you're ever feeling adventurous. Now, this might surprise you, but powdered gelatin was genuinely also popular during the Second World War. This was essentially entirely due to the restriction on meats and fats and how gelatin was used as a substitute in those scenarios. See, people needed fillers in their dishes badly, and gelatin just happened to be a really good one. You could also not cut too deeply into your dairy or meat reserves if you were relying on gelatin. A low-cost and stable product was perfect for the kind of life people were living during the war, and powdered gelatin was cheap too. People had also really begun relying on foraging and growing their own fruits, and a big way to make them taste and feel better as well as become heavier as a meal was to mix in gelatins and make salads out of them. Plus, fruit-flavored gelatin had also become really popular. Most families would try to make use of canned fruits too. It helped to put a bunch of really cheap and low-cost ingredients together for a fulfilling meal, rather than focusing too heavily on exhausting one ingredient and making it the centerpiece of your entire meal. One of the highest causes of malnutrition and all the other issues that can come with it is a massive lack of fat, and wartime drippings were a great way to get around that big problem. Rations would often not last until the end of the week, and dinners would get bland, boring, and uninspired. So people started collecting bacon drippings and reusing them, adding them to potato-based dishes or loaves to make their dinners a bit yummier. It was not too hard to make, and it really let you use every aspect of a bacon strip, so we can see why people took to this so well. The Great Depression was no reason to skip gelatin packets, which were pantry staples and culinary alchemy in powdered form. Gelatin was a cook's best friend because of its uncanny ability to turn liquid into solid, allowing it to stretch ingredients farther than anyone thought possible. Why was gelatin so popular during the Depression? First of all, it was cheap and easy to store. The packets could sit on the shelf indefinitely, waiting for the day when a family had to pull something out of the cupboard, something that looked like a real meal. Gelatin was even used to make mock recipes that looked like expensive foods, so families could enjoy a taste of luxury on a shoestring budget. In the 1930s, gelatin was a sign of ingenuity and resourcefulness, but today it conjures up images of wobbly Jell-O molds at family gatherings. Its culinary heyday may be over, but gelatin is a nostalgic reminder of how far creativity can go when times are hard. Canned luncheon meat was like Spam's less famous but more generic cousin during the post-war days. It was another affordable protein source that was readily available everywhere. It was used in sandwiches, salads, or simply eaten on its own when no other resource was around. It was also a good choice for big households when wallets were too tight back in the day. It was an instant hit in the States and made its way to other parts of the world before it became a pantry staple in Europe too. I mean, what's not to love about a cheap, easy-to-make meat option that's easy to store and prepare? But let's be honest, it's probably best left in the can. Unless you're a fan of processed meat flavor, I know I'm not. Speaking of influences from different cultures, lots of Americans began to take a lot of advantage of pemmican. This was typically something that was always a Native American food, and it had a massive part to play in how people were going to be eating during the Second World War. Its use was a bit niche, and it was definitely heavily regional. If you weren't living in the right place, such as the western parts of America and the South, you would almost never encounter this. The US military had the opposite experience with pemmican, on the other hand. They wanted food that was high-calorie and easy to carry around, and this is exactly what pemmican was like. It was typically made by drying bison, which have an extreme importance in Native American culture. It was very important for bison populations to be treated with respect, but the over-reliance on pemmican meant that they were also farmed and butchered more than they usually ever would have been. However, this also meant that traditional pemmican was the perfect thing to eat during the war. It was rare to get protein from actual meat during that period, but that didn't stop people from fulfilling their cravings by dabbling in mock cuisine, such as the popular mock fish fillet. While this did not actually use fish, it imitated the texture and flavor with pints of milk brought to boil, ground rice, chopped onion, and leeks, with the end being a good stir in a properly beaten egg. What you had was an excellent mimicry that felt close enough to the real thing while being distinct and offering a new experience. Nowadays, this recipe is used in vegan communities, but its origins come from very anti-vegan places, and it would be a great substitute for actual fish and chips as well. Canned liver wasn't the most comfortable food, but it was a lifeline during the Great Depression. This pantry staple was a nutritional powerhouse, packed with protein, vitamins, and minerals, and didn't require refrigeration, a godsend for families without access to fresh meat. It was metallic and mushy, but on a day when every calorie mattered, canned liver did the trick. The canned liver was a surprisingly versatile food. It could be spread on bread for a quick meal, mixed into casseroles, or fried up with onions to make something almost palatable. Its rich flavor, sometimes too rich, made it a cheap way to feed a family because a little went a long way. Canned liver can even be blended into meatloaf or meatballs, stretching meals without sacrificing protein for those willing to get creative. Canned liver is a rare thing today, but its legacy lives on as a symbol of frugality and resilience. It wasn't about taste or presentation for Depression-era families, it was about survival. A tin of canned liver in the cupboard was evidence that even the most unappealing ingredients could keep you alive and give you hope when things got the toughest. Canned ham was like the instant ramen of foods back in the post-war days. In 1940, it started gaining traction as the miracle meat during World War II. It was also transported as an aid to Great Britain and the Soviet Union. Canned ham was nothing fancy, which was the best thing about this meal. It was perfect for busy households or people on the run. Plus, its long shelf life was like the cherry on top. Back in the day, this was a convenience food dream come true. No fuss, no muss, just a whole lot of ham. But let's be real. Fresh ham is where it's at. Unless you're stranded on a desert island, I'd stick to the deli counter. We don't need to punish ourselves with canned meat anymore, which is why this dinner has become a part of ancient history. During the Great Depression, cabbage wasn't just a vegetable, it was practically a survival mascot. Cabbage was cheap, hearty, and ridiculously versatile, and it became a Depression-era darling. Cabbage stretched meals and stomachs alike, whether it was boiled, fried, pickled, or turned into sauerkraut. Cabbage's long shelf life was one of its biggest selling points. A head of cabbage could be stored for weeks, making it a perfect stockpiling food. It was also a prolific grower that did well in backyard gardens and was an endless source of greens for frugal families. It was a powerhouse nutritionally, with vitamin C, fiber, and antioxidants to ward off illness and keep people going. A popular option was pickling cabbage into sauerkraut to add tangy flavor and preserve the vegetable for months. During the Great Depression, cabbage was a lifesaver, but today it might not seem glamorous. The humble charm of it is that it is so adaptable and can turn the simplest of ingredients into something satisfying. Which grandma trick will you try first? Comment below, like the video, and subscribe for more kitchen wisdom.